Aloha means to keep first, to remember what comes first. One day will be that last breath, right? That. So if you remember, always put first this idea that one day it will be your last, right? Between then and now, try to do something good for somebody, right? It's like between then and now. My grandfather used to say, all you got to do is help one other living being. Doesn't even have to be a human, right? It's like one other living being. Your life will have meaning, right? To have been there in that moment of need and to have provided that need without asking for repayment, right? This is aloha. We over there with a big book to explain to you, what happened in the 5th grade. Remember that time Dennis took those $2 from me? It's like, no, there's nobody to wrap up your life neatly. It's sort of like, he told me, if you don't make sense of your life as it's moving along, why would it matter to anyone else? Right? It's like that. In fact, each of us as living beings are trying to make sense of our own experience, right? Let alone invest. We have had interesting individuals throughout the ages who have invested in other people understanding, right? That moment, that life, right? And they're bodhisattvas, you know what I mean? Or we call them saints or martyrs or, look at Copernicus, right? Polish school teacher, right? Who actually giant leap in awareness. And for that, they torture him for 12 years, right? 8 years of heavy torture, and then they kill him. Right? Apparently, no good deed goes unpunished. Right? It's like apparently you can't, right? So when we look at karma, when we look at our life experience, there really is very little sense to it other than what we bring to it ourselves. I mean, can you imagine what Nikolai Copernicus' thoughts were in those last few hours, right? As they're burning him alive, right? And it's like,
should have
he's
just
like,
agreed.
guys, I was just trying to explain something, right? It's like it's light, right? It's like, and it's like, oh no, I've run into a wall. So we think about our political pressures. Like we think about Chinese onto the gold system, the collapse of the American economy, imminent, right? It looks like it's right there in the future. For sure, the Americans have got lunatics in charge of the circus at the moment, which just validates and substantiates even more the Chinese demand for us moving away from the American dollar. Right now, it's an interesting thing, right? From the Western perspective, it's like, oh, wow, that could be calamitous, right? Food shortages, transportation of goods, energy shortages, real disasters. But, I think the uber rich are probably interested since 1994 in the first climate reports from Buckminster Fuller's center, interested in reducing the population by at least 5 billion, right? So that I don't think they're upset about food shortages or it's just a matter of whether they'll survive well or not, right? It's kind of an interesting thing. We're all disposable sea monkeys, right?
Well, I
Hanging.
don't think. Well, all of that wealth and that power transcends any political or governmental or country structure. Like that's,
Absolutely.
yeah. And if you look at those
And
networks,
what does that wealth and power mean when they get to those final hours, like Nikolai Copernicus? Right?
same as it means for all, maybe more bereft than ever because you've spent no time cultivating a relationship with the divine.
Exactly, my brother,
Fear.
right? And in those moments, and I've sat hospice a lot, right? It's in those moments where it becomes eminently clear to the living being that there is a finite end, right? To this experience. Not an end to all experience, just an end to this one, right? The one that you're in and you're clinging to. And I always wonder, why it is we fight so hard to cling to things we know must slip through our hands, right? It's like there's a knowing. We know that this is going to be intangible. And yet somehow, right, this desperate clinging to life. About 10 years ago, I get really, really sick, right? I'm out in the South Pacific. I'm advocating for moving away from oil, right? I'm talking about wind energy and, right, hydrocarbons and and then I get poisoned, right? And I'm like, who'd want to poison me? How about the oil companies that are about to lose $825 million annual in sales because you're running at your mouth, right? And it's like, okay, I figured it out, right? I'm over here thinking I'm doing a good thing. And it turns out that they're going to pay 50 grand to somebody to go poison that guy and take him off the board because it's not a good thing, right? So there I am, paralyzed, laying up in bed in Cedar Sinai. I can't move, quadriplegic. Doctors coming in, shaking their heads, lead levels at 72%. Your liver's going to shut down. You got about 2 months to live, right? You should get your affairs in order, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, cool, right? It's like, good on you, fellas, right? But I don't buy this idea of it being, a minor scientist, somebody who observes systems, right? And watches evidence to see what is actually occurring in front of us. I know that none of us know, right? It's like, I know that little bit of Greek, right? So agnos would be no knowledge of, right? So gnosis being knowledge, agnos, like an agnostic being no knowledge of, and die being the Greek word for two. Right. So here's the doctor giving me his diagnosis. And I'm laying there in the bed thinking to myself, okay, so both of us don't know what's going on. Got it. Right. Diagnosed. There's two of us. Neither of us know what's going on. Thanks that the system provides insurance liability to you, right? You can stand there and in Greek tell me you don't know what's going on, and you're the only one legally allowed to tell me a diagnosis, right? It's like, what kind of system do we have here, right? So my thought was, okay, that's your reality. My reality is, yeah, I got kids to feed. There's a lot more work to do. Let's get to it. Right. So here we are 10 years later. I'm no longer a paraplegic, right? I'm no longer a quadriplegic. I'm back up and running. Had another bout with angioedema cancer, another death sentence. You're going to die in 2.6 months. Really? Well, that's 17 months ago, right? And now they're like, what? What? And I'm like, I don't know, talk to the flower. Right? It's like it knows as much as you know about what is predictability into the future, right? Whatever is occurring, and I'm certain that it is occurring under the watchfulness of creation far greater than you or I, right? Of creation at a much larger scale, right? It's like, I get that there are microbes that are making up my body, but wow, are we like termites on the surface of a world that is so small that if you flew past our solar system, you wouldn't even see the interior planets, which, by the way, after 5,000 solar systems, this is the only solar system we found with the planets on the interior, the rocky planets on the interior.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Every other system, the gas giants, are near the star. moving very quickly. The rocky planets, like you would think, right? In the external orbits, in the cold, icy orbit, right? Like the asteroids. Like, so our solar system with this weird asteroid belt broken up inside the gas giants, and then, you know, four rocky planets in closer to the sun. It's so close to our sun that if you were flying by, you wouldn't actually see them because they're just so close to the sun, right? That the brightness of the glare of the sun, the radiation, it masks the planets. And it makes you wonder, what's up with that? Why is this the only solar system that seems to be set up that way, right? And then I start thinking, those old legends, the stories we follow, whether it's Shiva with the Atani monkeys, right? Asking them to help rescue the wife, and the building of the bridge, which we now know is a land bridge and is not, in fact, islands, right? From all the way over to Ceylon. So those stories, coupled with stories of the Anunnaki and Enlil and Eng, so you start thinking, okay, well, what's the big deal with gold? I mean, if I was picking something precious, I would have picked water, right? If I came to the planet, I would have gone to water. The water is the thing you really need, right? It's like, but gold, right? And gold in these stories and these legends. And sure, we can eat gold. It's not very nutritious, but but the fact is, gold is one of the only principal metals that can, conduct electricity in zero gravity. That's why satellites and spaceships are so expensive, which makes you think. Let's revisit those stories again about these giant guys from space who come down and demand gold, right? Because in fact, they need gold for a completely different reason than we think, right? It's not ornamental. Now, imagine, and now I'm going to go way out on a tangent because I just love this stuff, right? Imagine there's a galactic council somewhere, and all these highly intelligent life forms share the resources of the galaxy that they're in, right? Knowing that the distance to the next galaxy is so far that even traveling at the speed of light, they're going to have trouble getting there, right? And then you got a couple of guys that are black marketing this really great commodity, gold, right? It only happens in a supernova. That's the only place it gets created. Then it has to travel across space, encased in rocks, fall into another gravity well, condense into a planet, and then excrete itself to the surface. And then you can get the gold and build your spaceship. So it's a pretty convoluted process. Imagine if a couple of those guys found a couple of rocky planets that had some gold and they scooted them in closer to a star so that nobody would see them, right, as they drive by. And every 10,000 years or so, they revisit this little planet. They get the sea monkeys to get them the gold, right? And it's just like the stories from before where they come with their own slaves and there's a revolt and then they have to create new slaves. Wow. That puts a whole new twist on the disaster stories. The first one about the burning out, which we see the silicate in the desert. We know that that's formed by immense heat. That's not sand from an ocean, right? That was like, whoa, something happened here in the Middle East, like some kind of huge disaster that totally destroyed something. Then we get these stories, like I said, in India about these, and the Hebrew stories, right? The Judean Christian floods. Whoa, that would be every time they come back to get the gold, they try to get rid of the evidence. Right? It's like nuke the planet first. Okay, that didn't work. The sea monkeys are still there. Okay, next time drown them out. Okay, that didn't work. Sea monkeys still there, right? It's like, and all of a sudden, the sea monkeys are setting off nuclear weapons in 1942. right, in 1945, setting off serious ones. And now there's no hiding the little rocky planets next to the star, right? Everybody saw that.
Yeah.
And then they're like, hey, wait a minute. Who's been visiting this planet? Right. And what you end up with on the other side is, right, a bunch of
Looking at the
galactic yahoos
nails.
going
Yeah.
like, nah, it wasn't me. Right. So right now, no contact because they're trying to figure out who did this thing. Here's the interesting thing about the Robert Heinlein tale, right, that I'm weaving. Imagine if you're Enki or Enlil and you're the guy that's been black marketing the gold, right, and off the planet, and you realize that all these sea monkeys have been wearing video cameras the whole time, that they're actually part of the creative intelligence of the universe. And every time one of them transcends, they download their whole experience to the create. So from the onset, you've been busted, right? It's like everybody you've been dealing with has been recording everything you've ever done on this planet and uploading it to the universal consciousness. So it's sort of like now you're trapped, right? Now you know you're not going to get away with it, and you just got to figure out how to negotiate, in the annals of galactic experience, right?
What do you think's happening with all these sightings that we're seeing now? It's amazing the coincidence with the US
Yeah, I
government
had an
obviously coming out.
experience. You know, I had a couple of NDEs, near death
Yeah.
experiences, and they kind of change your life. But I had this one experience. I get to go visit these other lifetimes that I've had here and abroad and other places. And I have this experience of roughly about 10,000 years in the future where I'm on a vessel and we're moving through the darkness of space. So, there's this really interesting thing. Is that my imagination? Right? Is that neurons firing, creating the something, or did I transcend? Right? Was I having a future memory, right, of something
Mm,
that has not occurred? Because I have past memories of lives in the 16th century,
mm,
right, in the 18th century, of a life so long ago. It was in North America. I don't, I think it was something like 35, 40,000 years ago, right? The world looked completely different.
mm,
We were definitely hunter gatherers, right? It's like something else was going on. And it was pre civilization. And I had that experience several times. But I'm never certain that I'm traveling as much as remembering,
mm,
right? It's not
mm,
like I'm physically transporting somewhere else. It's kind of like there's a memory
mm,
that exists from the beginning to the end of this experience. And if
mm,
I'm cognizant,
mm,
and willing, I can tap into that memory
mm,
at different locations.
mm.
And it's interesting because I've since 88 or so over in Texas when we were talking about Big Bang, right? I'm not a Big Bang guy, right? And what's interesting is what we're seeing now with James Webb is showing us, yeah, Big Bang doesn't actually work, right? It's like when you look back at these early galaxies, they're fully formed, right? And completely in shape. If it was Big Bang, they wouldn't look like that at all, right? It would be a mess up there in that first 30 light years, of existence. Um, I was thinking to myself, have you ever seen that diagram, the sort of bell curve of creation where here's the Big Bang and we come to 50
Yeah.
million light years and now here's the radiation screen and it starts
Yeah. Yeah.
expanding. And they're talking about how it expands and dark energy and dark matter and how it's pushing and moving. Well, I agree with dark matter and dark energy. I also agree that we call it dark only because we don't understand it.
Mm.
Right? Well, my grandfather says to me, if you're the creator, then by your very nature, you are not part of the creation.
Mm.
Right? You are the
Mm.
creator, right? The creation is the thing over there that you just did, right? So he always used to say to me, the creator is masculine in our cultural thinking, but the creation is feminine, right? The thing that is creating and ongoing. So the creator then wants to enter the creation to have an understanding of, of itself, of what's occurring. And it has to do it the same way it has to do it in all biology. You literally have to enter the creation, right? And it's like a little bit of liquid. And next thing you know, we're looking around the galaxy for water. Because everywhere we find water, right, we're finding the chemical process and the creation. So is the creator hydrogen? Is it the most prevalent,
Mm.
you know, ignitable element we can see in our system? But those ignitable elements, they only make up about 11% of the universe that we can see, right? They reflect light on another 7% or
Mm.
6%, bringing us up to about 17. But there's an awful lot of matter that is not illuminated, right? The dark matter, the dark energy. So more is the thing, the creation, the palette, right? The canvas onto which our paint is spilled, right? The paint that we
Mm.
call suns and stars and galaxies, but it's not the canvas, right? The canvas is this sort of large, unknowing potential, right? Within the darkness. In our culture, we say Ho, which talks about that ultimate darkness, or Uli.
Mm.
And it's also a name for grandmother in our culture, right? Because we consider the great grandmother as being the creation entity, and the grandfather as being part of the creative force, but
Mm.
not part of creation, right?
It's
And it's really interesting perspective.
it's that nothing. I've had that experience where I felt that it's the nothing. Everything comes from the nothing, which is sounds kind of
Yes,
cliche, but it's like it's a deep truth. Like there's this canvas, as you said, it's just this blank,
yes.
deep nothingness where
I think the
everything is
guys in
born
the
from.
dream time know this, right? They
Yeah,
understand that, right?
yeah,
That's why they
yeah,
go to dream time, and they
yeah.
understand like how it's being created. And if that is so, then maybe there's not a big bang.
Mm.
Maybe what really happens is we are falling down a black hole. So our entire universe could just be sitting within a meta bubble that is its own black hole. And the reason you can't see the first 50 light years is because the black hole is sucking all light down into it. So you literally cannot see beyond the event horizon.
Mm.
And just like all things falling, we're picking up momentum and we're picking up speed and we're falling away from each other, right? Which we will all eventually fall into the next large black hole that's at the center of each one of these galaxies, right? So it's this continuum, right? The way I've always seen it. It's there's never been a beginning and there's
No.
not an end. There's just this cyclical continuum, you know?
It's that, but there's two things. I remember when I was younger and I was obsessed with watching just the light fall through trees. I subsequently became
Right.
I became a photographer for quite a long time, and I was just because
I,
I was
I did the same thing.
all
I did
right.
exactly the same thing. Like watching the light waves. I
I was
wanted
just
a
obsessed
camera.
with
I
light.
wanted,
Yeah, it was
yeah,
just this. It was just this. But the thing I loved the most about it is that when you're in that space, you could palpably feel that time didn't exist.
yes,
That there was
yes,
there was this eternal substance that I can't put into words. But watching it, I just felt okay. That there is life. Like that. That's the
yeah,
purity of life, and everything else is a construct. It felt like a construct from there. Uh, and then, geez, I lost my second thread, which had to do with that. It's also the patience when I look. I was just going to say, when I look at the indigenous culture here, there's this, and I can only speak to what people have experienced here, but like it's probably a thread that runs through indigenous cultures who are more based in a timeless existence in mythology. That's less to do with this. I need to have a theory and understand everything through time, which is sort of our
And
Western
timeless
model.
is an interesting way to put it. Those indigenous cultures tend to reckon by the moon,
Hmm.
not the sun, right? Which is
Can you explain
interesting.
that? Yeah.
They're on moon calendars, the way the
Yeah.
Chinese are on moon calendars.
Yeah.
Even the Hebrews are still on their moon calendar, right? Most indigenous cultures were celebrating their ceremonies by the moon. They were aware of the sun.
Hmm.
They were aware of the solstices and the equinox and the progression, but their daily lives were ruled by the moon
Hmm.
that was there every day, right? Changing, shifting. The moon is so interesting. It's never in the same position in the sky for 8 years and 6 months. Right, but people don't know that. They think every month it's in the same
Same
position in the
spot.
sky. It's because you've never actually watched, right? It's
Yeah.
like if they actually watched and marked it, they would see that it isn't. It's constantly wobbling and turning, and so it's actually a more accurate timepiece,
Hmm.
what I mean, for us and an easier way. But like you said, its time keeping does not delineate into diurnal and nocturnal, right? The moon is
Hmm.
it's transgressing both of those borders versus the sun, which sets you into a zero-sum game binary perspective,
Hmm.
right? It's either day or it's night, right? It's like it's just, and if it's day, then wake up and get out in the fields for me.
Yeah.
Right, where it used to be, wait a minute. Daytime was when humans didn't walk around because we got eaten by big animals, right? So it's like we hid just like all the other small guys and came out at night, right? And scurried around. So how did we get to this? We're waking up at 6 in the morning and working in your coal mine for you,
Yeah.
right? It's a very interesting thing, right? It's like left to our own resources, I probably would sleep twice a day, right? I'd have a daytime sleeping cycle. I'd have a nighttime sleeping cycle. Right. I like to be up around 4 o'clock in the morning. I
Yeah.
like watching the dawn, right? It's like I like watching sunset. And wow, if you got a 9 to 5 job, that's almost impossible because at sunrise you're busy trying to get the kids off to school, right?
Hmm.
And get yourself to work. And at sunset, you're still working in the office. So,
It's this
right, it's
crush.
like, oh, we miss.
It's this
Yeah,
crushing of the natural. Though I love to talk about your upbringing because I found that really beautiful and a good canvas for understanding for me how we don't question the structures which we're born into. And I'm not talking
yeah,
about your upbringing. I'm talking about the way you were brought up and then perceiving the paradigm which
yeah.
most of the people live under here. And we don't question the origins of our words that we use. We don't question these uh,
And
the pro.
I got to tell you, early on in elementary and then immediate intermediate school, when I first started interfacing, with the boarding school culture, with the idea of
Mm,
an Oxford education, um, I I was pretty much ostracized, right? All the other kids thought I was really weird. Here's this really weird kid who doesn't follow all the structures. But it really made it obvious to me that there are some real developed structures that are imposed on human beings in the culture of modernity, right?
mm,
And it's easy to see that it's for productivity, right? It's like I've prided myself on the fact that I never really what are you going to be when you grow up, Billy? A fireman, right? It's like that never it never even entered my mind that I ran away to the circus, became a rock and roll musician. Turns out I'm a native priest, right? Who knew? Right? I tell you who knew. My grandfather knew. He told me I was going to behave badly, and I did.
He set you up.
Yeah. But I saw Jimi Hendrix play live.
That'll do it.
Bro, you know
What are
what
you
I'm
gonna
saying?
do? Yeah,
Once you're there, you see Dylan guys, it's like, oh man, how could I?
yeah.
You can't keep the kid down on the taro patch, right? It's like I gotta go grab a guitar and run off to New York City, right? It's like
It's
actually I went to Rochester first with Kodak because I was way into photography, right? And then I found out I was colorblind, lost my scholarship, ended up
what?
drifting down to Manhattan because I didn't want to go home with my tail between my legs. So when you're 19 and you figure you go take on the city, it's and whoa, was that like going to Rome,
I can
right? It's like,
imagine. Yeah,
right, the Roman
yeah.
Empire moves from Byzantine and Italy up into France, becomes Charlemagne, right? Then it's up in London. Now it's in America, right? Eagle on the top of a post, right? It's like all the same imagery, all the same signs, right? I look at New York, uh, you know, and you're seeing Naples. You look down at Washington D.C. You're seeing Rome, right? This pretentious kind of, overly wrought, control and power in a central place where they bring people to intimidate, right? It's amazing. So, you know, did the Nazis just change the I to an A and become NASA? I mean, it's real hard to figure these things
Well,
out, right? It's
they took a lot of the Nazi rocket scientists. That's for sure.
Yeah, no
That's pretty
kidding.
well
We always have
documented.
that joke, right? It used to be NASA, right, in Germany, and all they did was change the I to an A, and now they're NASA, right? They're
Ta-da!
not the Nazis, and every other science division in America is under the Department of Commerce. It's because if your science is going to impact the economic structure, we don't want to hear about it,
Mm,
right? It's like it's interesting, except for NASA. NASA gets to be its own thing, its own little
mm,
science thing over there as the United States tries to develop Space Force,
mm,
right? They're openly talking about Space Force. They gave it a $6.2 billion annual budget this year. And they're trying to build a force that monitors space and so can take out China's satellites, Russia's satellites, and make the United States the super. Boy, does that sound like the Nazis' plan in 1943. You know what I mean? In 44. It's like, are you kidding me? Did you just, and why would the United States think it owns all of space?
yeah, no, and it coincides. It's weird too with all these UFO sightings too we're having now, and all
Yeah.
the things they're talking about. This just there's no as if this is just some coincidence that everything's culminating at the
Right, right,
same
right. And what
time.
they're doing
Like
is creating the threat, right? They're
they're
creating the
creating the
threat that
threat.
justifies their
Yeah,
move to
we need
space.
to do this now. Yeah.
They want to do space from Hawaii. Right? There's a reason Elvis's worldwide concert was from Hawaii. It's because we're set up closest to the equator as we go around the world. The world turns like this. It doesn't turn like this.
Mm,
Right? It turns like this as it's moving 17,000 years in an arc through our galaxy, right? 253 million years to go around one time, right? It's like we lose track of these large measurements because,
mm,
our brains can't hold on to them. But the fact is, they want to be at this high point so they can see to the far side of the planet, the satellites. So they need to be near Hawaii. But here's the kicker: the United States is illegally in Hawaii. Hawaii is its own kingdom. The United States illegally is occupying Hawaii and trying to pretend that this is America. What I find really unique to American hypocrisy is the fact that the Americans can break the treaty with the UN, which said that Norway would be the country that supplied superconductors. The Americans go down to Taiwan, finance the building of a superconductor factory, blame it on the Taiwanese, even though it's all financed by us, so that we can sell cheap goods to China so that they can sell us cheap goods, right, made from these other superconductors. And when China says, hey, you owe us $24.7 trillion, we're thinking we're just going to take Taiwan back and the superconductor factory, right? America says, no. Taiwan is 109 miles from the coast of China. It's filled with Chinese people who escaped while Mao Zedong was moving on Beijing, right? And they speak Chinese and they eat Chinese food and they have Chinese culture. The Americans are saying they have a right to their sovereignty. But the Hawaiians, who speak a different language, have a different culture, are 2,000 miles from the coast of California. No. We don't have those kinds of rights. We're Americans. Right? Amazing, the Americans. Their level of hypocrisy knows no bounds, right? It's like,
well, I don't think it's pretty clear though. I mean, it's just the economics of any of this is convenient for whatever story they want to tell. With regards,
absolutely.
I guess what's amazing is that cognitive dissonance of people who live in America for themselves, who will get behind a cause and say independence of Taiwan or whatever country without understanding the teeniest bit about a history or motivation
of America, right?
You know, they just buy liberty. Oh, it's for liberty. What the fuck are you talking about, liberty?
I mean, look, Donald Trump just goes, let's rename the mountain Mount McKinley. That is such a racist, ideological thing, right? The white guy, let's name it after the president who created Manifest Destiny and let's go out and take over the whole world in the name of Christianity, right? It's like following up with Pope Gregory's little requests in the 16th century. But so here's Donald Trump saying to the Alaskans, let's not call it Denali, which you've been calling it that for 10,000 years. Let's call it Mount McKinley again. People in Alaska getting very upset. And the ones that aren't are the white folks that moved up from Arkansas about a year and a half ago, right? It's like, they're like, what? Oh, he's the president. He can call it Mount McKinley. I say that because McKinley is the same asshole who authorized taking over Hawaii.
I didn't know that.
Right? And they actually changed the name of the school, Honolulu High, which had existed for a couple of decades, to McKinley High School. So we're having a whole big debate in Hawaii. Like, why is that school called McKinley? Right? And why is his statue in the front yard of the school holding a bronze document in his hands that says Annexation Treaty of Hawaii? There is no annexation treaty. There never was. Right. But here's the Americans making a bronze statue of their president holding a non-existent document right in front of the school, pretending that somehow democracy reigns supreme and freedom is the main thrust of the Americans. Not really. It's more like corporatocracy and oligarchy. Right? They took over Hawaii because they needed a fueling station for the Spanish-American War. And after they defeated Spain, they said, well, Hawaii is the spoils. Hawaii never belonged to Spain. We don't have anything to do with the Spanish, except maybe, some rice. I mean, refried beans. No, that's probably more Tex-Mex than it is Spanish. Right? So, I mean, really, what's going on here? What are the Americans playing at? Why do they continue to play? Now, why would I be interested in this? It's because the Pacific, of which, Aotearoa is a major part of, the Pacific is probably the most dominant region on the planet. And for some reason or other, these colonial powers in Europe think that they're supposed to be running our world. Right? We live out here in the Pacific. Right? The folks in Rarotonga, the folks in Fiji, right? The folks in Samoa, in the Canucks, the people in Aotearoa, even Australia. So I've been talking with the Samoan Prime Minister for some time, and she brought up ecocide, right, to the international courts. And why wouldn't we realign the United Nations, right? I'm suggesting we create the nation of Oceania. It's got 5 states: Atlantica, Pacifica, Indica, Arctica, and Antarctica, right? So it's all the island nations. Hey, that would include Ireland, Iceland, England, the Caribbean, right? The Balkans. That would include Japan, Singapore, right? That Java. I mean, if you stop and think about it, this would remake global economics. Right? And I was thinking the English, hey, they can't push the European Union around anymore. They need a new group of folks to go influence, right? It's like we could create, and there's real economic capacity here. Why is it tariffs are paid when ships reach harbors, right?
Mm.
The goods are crossing the ocean.
Mm.
Why are they not paying the tariffs to
On
the
the
island
roads.
nations? Right? It's like you're crossing our. And what do you mean we get to your port, now we got to pay money? You need these goods. How about we don't send them? Right?
Mm.
It's here now. Where's your tariff? Right? It's like these guys could be screaming for goods from Australia and China, right?
Mm.
Screaming for goods from the Pacific Islands,
Mm.
screaming for our fish. And now they want to hydromine and poison our ocean. That's going to be the legacy of our grandchildren, or right? So all of this is terribly interesting around world economics. It's still designed and controlled by the Vikings and the European powers in Geneva and Zurich, right? They're still looking at like, we jump out and control the world in this colonial peace, even though after World War II, there was a treated global agreement to support independence of
Mm.
countries and human rights and independence of people. And today in 2024, we see a diminishing of that,
Mm.
right? Which is interesting because 60, 70 years ago, that's what all of humanity was fighting for,
Mm.
right? Is the ability to be human, to not be round up and put
Mm.
in a cage somewhere because of your culture or your belief or your sexual identity, right? And here we are, right back at that intersection.
Mm.
Amazing. Because we always say, if we don't remember our history, we repeat it. But we actually have a memory of that history and we're repeating it anyway. Right? It's really interesting to watch.
Do you feel too, like, I wonder if it's also the last gasps of these systems which are collapsing? Because if we look at,
I absolutely agree with you. It is not
yeah,
only the last gasp, it's the desperate last gasp,
yeah,
which
to go
means
back
that
to the
they
old,
become dangerous, right? They become very dangerous.
it's definitely
I told
dangerous, but
I told someone that the white racists in America, they will be challenged till they're about 28%, 28, 30%. And then they're going to jump back because as they feel themselves diminishing in their role, right, they're going to, and which is exactly what we're seeing now, right? White racist America is reasserting itself on the world. Now, the trick is, what will the world say, right? Because the grandparents of these Americans were the very ones that went over to Europe to fight against the fascism. And now their grandchildren and their great grandchildren are the fascists, right? It's like,
mm,
what do we do? Maybe we should not have brought those rocket scientists over, right? Maybe Rumsfeld and those guys should have stayed in Europe. I mean, we don't know, right? It's like, clearly it's moving the way it's moving. I concur with you. I think this is the last gasp of this oligarchy that honestly has been running everything for about the last 2,000 years. right?
I
The
was,
meta chief.
yeah. Well, no, but that's my take on that. What's happening, and it's like it's not a it's. I haven't spent too much time thinking about it because I don't want to waste my energy
Right.
on,
Why
on
waste your
that
time,
stuff
right? It's like, I
because I
got
can't
you.
do. But I mean, look at okay. So there's two things. If we look at, we don't question where all of our legal structures come from, and they're all from maritime law, and they're all these that have
Yes.
been around. Uh,
And that's all corporate law, right?
it's all
That's
corporate law and all
absentee.
goes exactly. So it goes against the natural human being and the state. It's all about making you a corporation so they could tax you and jail you
Exactly.
and control you. And that's not some out there conspiracy theory. That's just straight up fact if you look into the legal
Yes.
system and
Oh, yes.
even the language. Um, but I was gonna say, like with you, what you said about like it's the same controllers. Like it doesn't matter. Like I see what's happened in the states. There was this clear corporatocracy, and whether whoever you want to say was pushing this agenda of ultra left wing wokeism and these things that riled up discontent, because it
Yes.
got so ludicrous with that side of the politics,
Oh,
where it
absolutely.
antidote to that, like I'm going to come in with these old fashioned and we're going to get rid of all this insanity. But what I see as what you just said in the middle of that is we're throwing out the things that were at the core of it, what people were trying to work on after the Second World War, which was understanding this ancient wisdom, respect for all peoples. Now that's just been, as I see it, anything now that's slightly left of right center is now thrown out into like, oh, indigenous knowledge, bullshit, more woke behavior,
Right.
more like we've lost that, and I don't. But the promising thing, I think there's a lot of people in the world who are actually very centrist, moderate, and just want to live their lives in peace. And I
Yeah,
feel that we
absolutely.
get the either ends of the noisy ones, like the crazy ones on the right, the crazy like it's
I completely agree.
extremists.
I
Yeah.
completely agree.
And they're the
You know,
puppets. They're the puppets of the oligarchs
yeah,
at the top who don't give a
I
shit. They don't
agreed
care
that
who's in
that
power.
that tension is manufactured, right? It's
Yeah.
manufactured to impact the 80% of us that are sitting here in the center.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at humanism, at our children, at feeding, at compassion, at understanding the world, right? It's like, but
Mm,
for some reason or other, the airwaves are dominated by either extreme,
mm,
right? And certainly reinforced by the media that likes the tension, right? It's like it's selling ads. But at what point, right, does the effective and quiet 80% raise its head,
mm.
right? Because my instinct is telling me that that moment is coming, right? It's like we're sitting here watching this insanity, like you said, but it's like a last gasp, right? And at some point, it wears thin on the
Mm.
majority of us, right? And we sit here, we realize we're watching a play, right? We're watching some drama that they want us to be distracted with, you know?
I mean, this is the thing you want. I just look at the people who I know, or the people in this country. You want to send those kids off to fight some like people in China or Russia? Like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Like, we did like
You
that
know,
generation's gone.
and here's the thing I keep thinking about. The reason they want to do it is so that they can nationalize $24 trillion of debt.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
sort of like Walmart millionaires never paid China for all their stuff, right? They're pretending they're millionaires, but it's all deficit spending. And when China says, hey, pay the tab, right? We say, oh, let's just go to war so we can just, write off that debt overnight. The most profitable war in the world,
Mm,
right? They don't even have to fire a shot. They just declare war, write off 24.7 trillion, which by the way, the US doesn't have.
mm.
So they really got to find a way. So what's the US trying to do? They're trying to get Philippines and Australia, right? And everybody to go fight the Chinese so that they can come along and join the war and go like, yeah, let's write off our debt, right? It's what? No, here's the thing. You can enter the Chinese restaurant. You can insult the young girl taking your order, her braces and stuff. She's just home from high school working for mom and dad.
Mm.
You can make fun of the cooks in the kitchen. You can complain about the almond duck, right? And you can make fun about the old grandma behind the cash register. but don't try to get up and leave the restaurant without paying. Right? And all of us who know the Chinese, we know what's about to happen next, right? It's like the kitchen will empty, guys in cleavers are coming out. There's going to be hell to pay, right? So I keep telling my American counterparts, don't try to leave the restaurant without paying the tab you owe the Chinese, because they're very low key, right? You think that they're powerless, but actually in their culture, they see it as politeness, right? They're not challenging you as you're badly behaved, right? It's your purview to be badly behaved, but don't try to run out without paying the tab. That's a whole different story, as far as the Chinese are concerned. So when we pull out of Afghanistan, and we do it quickly as the United States, and we leave, you know, some $200 billion worth of equipment there.
Yeah, which is now being used
by the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
This was all intentional.
Yeah, it had to be.
Yeah, when they pulled out,
yeah.
they left the gear there. They knew the Uyghurs, as soon as they get control of Afghanistan, are going to attack the western flank of China. That's what the Uyghurs want to do, right? That's their country that China has taken over and thrown their countrymen into re-education camps, right?
That's can I bring up that? I've got to bring up that cognitive dissonance, because it's really interesting with the Chinese Muslims. Like how I think it was over 1 million they've killed in the period of a couple of 5 years or something. And they're still doing it en masse. And then you get all the people in the West going on about Israel and Palestine and about the suppression of
I know,
Muslims.
right?
What are you talking about? Like,
I know, it's ludicrous. It's like they're selective.
So, I mean, either you're for all people, you're not for bloody anyone.
For us in Hawaii, it's incredible. We watch in Hawaii these young Americans complaining about Palestine, and we're like,
madness.
But you're here in our country, and you don't give a shit. It's like you step all over us
when you're leaving.
It's Para America, but right. But Beirut, we're gonna go over.
It's like this.
Incredible.
You'll love this. Is where I used to live in Melbourne, which is down south.
I know Melbourne. It's
it was very, very aware. Look, very left leaning where I was living, and they used to put on all these houses, which we acknowledge the indigenous peoples of whatever, of the Kulin Nation, which it was there. It's like you're living in your $3 million house, really expensive area. You're living in this beautiful house. It's like
I totally got it, bro.
And it's like, why don't you give them? Why don't you leave and give them back your house then? You're just acknowledging them. I was just like, what are you talking about? You acknowledge them. How's that helping?
Bro, the West Coast. The West Coast of the U.S. is just I want to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Ohlone. It's like, okay.
Now fuck off.
Are you leaving? Right? Are you going? Right? It's like,
no, I'm
not going. Drop a $5 in the tip bucket here? Maybe one of the Ohlone could eat breakfast.
Right?
No. It's amazing. It's amazing how they're going through these platitudes and they're calling it enlightenment.
Well, that's the thing. It's like if you're going to be like, and I can sense that people feel they'll be watching media and the super hyper focus on one issue, and you'll see the children suffering, and it's a natural response to be like, this is awful.
Yes.
I'm not denying that, but then equally, if you're going out into your street and stepping over a homeless person and being, oh God, bloody homeless, this is, or it's inconvenient. How are you being? Yeah, either you're that encompasses all, and we all have up ebbs and flows, but either you're embodying those principles of love and compassion for everything, or it's just virtue signaling because you've not integrated it.
Yes.
So it's you're awash in the sea of you don't understand. You're not. I mean, I don't mean to criticize. But you're not being that thing. You're just signaling to other people that you care about this thing, whilst other things don't matter.
You're reacting. Right, you're reacting in the moment to some turmoil you might feel transpersonally.
Yes,
but it isn't something that's a marked core belief.
Yes,
right? It isn't something that you're holding, and it's true that we're at a crossroad here where, because of digital communication, I mean, look at you and I are talking.
That's crazy.
Right? can share ideas across time and space. We're no longer controllable,
Mm,
frankly, by Cambridge and Oxford's library,
mm,
right? It's like
yeah.
not all intelligence is sitting over there in London, right? It's like apparently there's wisdom everywhere.
Mm,
And here's the thing. I'd always been raised to understand that everybody on the planet is indigenous, right? It's really interesting. It's like the native people are not calling themselves native. They think all
yeah.
the people are native, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just native to where, right?
Yeah.
So my grandfather, he told me this really interesting thing when I was 11. I was struggling, going to the city, and I didn't realize we were poor, right? I still don't think we were, but apparently by modern standards, we had no money, but my lifestyle I thought was great. Um,
Is that Richard
so
Pryor? What's that Richard Pryor? See no hear evil, hear no hero. Evil. That
yeah, yeah,
film.
yeah,
I'm black.
yeah,
I can't
yeah.
believe I'm black.
I'm glad. Yeah, exactly.
So
Who said that? No,
good.
but it's that thing where he says to me because I didn't understand, right? I told him there's so many different people, there's so many different cultures, right? And economic station, right? That was playing into what I was seeing, hierarchies. And my grandfather says, boy, he always used to say that when he was going to tell me something, like boy. It's like he
something
never used
something
my
deep.
name.
Yeah.
It's like a gender signal, right? He said, boy, he said, there's only two kinds of people in the world, and you're both of them,
That's brilliant. I've got to use
right? And
that.
I was like, what? And he says, the first person we call a malahini. That means like a stranger or a tourist, right? Somebody who just showed up. Lihi means little, and mala is like garden. So they know very little about the garden. They're not really they're not really queued up. They don't know where to go. They don't know where to get anything to eat. They don't know where the water's. They don't even know where the restrooms are, right? Because they just showed up. He said the other person is called a kama aina, right? And aina being the land or the ground that feeds us or our families and relationships. Kama mean understand. So
Mm,
if you understand your relationships and your families and your connectivity, then you know where you are, right? You know where the good food is to eat. You know where the fresh water is. So in other words, you either from here or you're not, right? It's like there's only two kinds of people. You either just showed up in town and you don't know what's going on, or you've been here for about 10 years and you know what's going on, right? Now he says a newborn baby is the ultimate malahini, right? They just showed up. They're not even going to be able to walk without falling down for 5 or 6 years, right? It's gonna be 20 years before they figure out what kind of ice cream, if you get my drift,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
you actually like, right? So he said, be gentle. All human beings fall into these two categories. If you're somewhere that you are unfamiliar with, then treat people with respect because you're a malahini and you just showed up and you don't know what's going on. If you're somewhere that you've been and you know and you understand deeply, then treat people with respect because they just showed up and they need the assistance, right? They need to understand where to go, what to do. And that was such a big lesson to me, right? He was like, two kinds of people, boy, and you're both of them, right? I was like, whoa, right? All of a sudden, I just start seeing all human beings tracking the same, right? It's like we're all tracking the same. We just got off the bus, right? I don't even know where the movie theater is, right? Or, hey, welcome to town. You know what I mean? Because I'm sitting here as you get off the bus, right? It's like there's only two kinds of people in the world. And we got to get past our innate prejudices, right? That I think are not even innate, right? They're actually developed for us
Mm.
like placed on us like
Mm.
mantles, like little badges of courage. You're us, not them. Right? It's like, well, what?
Mm.
Right? What us? What them? Right? Aren't we all us? Right?
Mm.
It's like when you ask a question like that, right? It's like, and we do everything. We separate gender, we separate, you know, appetites, we separate color, we say this whole siloing. And you know what it leads to? It leads to a world where we think the marine, the terrestrial, and the atmospheric are actually separate sciences,
Mm.
right?
That's
Which is
insanity.
asinine. We're talking about the smart people, and
Yeah.
they see it as, right? In fact, it's one system, it's one water bubble. We're all in it, right? Everything affects everything. There is no such thing as marine debris, right? That's our shit in the ocean. Right, the fish did not come up with
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
rubber tires. They did not do those candy wrappers. It's not marine debris, right? It's solid waste that you let get from the ground into the ocean, right? It's like, and you're gonna pretend somehow, no, we have a solid waste management problem and we have a marine debris problem. Right? It's like, no, you don't. You have a solid waste trash problem. And you've been paying really bad companies to go out to the Indian Ocean and dump stuff. And then you're trying to pretend you didn't, right? You're trying to pretend that you didn't actually take that contract with that company that loaded all of your garbage up on those barges and then drove 45 miles offshore and then dumped it all, right? Because that's actually what's going on with the industry. Right. And then did you take care of that medical waste? Oh, yeah, we got rid of it. Right. It's all now at the bottom of the ocean. Right. And it's the fish's problem.
What?
Right. And so here we are. You and I can talk about this blithely, and yet it's going to wholly impact our food chain, wholly impact the generations that come after you and I. Right. And when I was 14, I was concerned with the 3-year-olds. Right. And now that I'm 69, I'm really concerned about the 3-year-olds.
Mm.
Right. My entire life sometimes to me seems like a waste. Things have gotten worse. But weren't they always going to appear this way just before they got better? Isn't that the nature of it? Right. Is that when the light grows, the shadow
The
becomes more
shadow becomes. I feel that's what's happening. It's like there's this great
distant?
unmasking, and all of this gunk that was always there but hidden is
You're
is
right.
is being,
You're right.
and we've got to get to that point, and it's going to
It's like
be.
ripping the band-aid off, right? At some point, the bandage has to come
It's got
off,
to
right?
come
It's
off, because
hurt like
otherwise,
hell.
how are we gonna change it?
Yes.
And I can only see it happening. I think we were talking before we started recording, but you're talking about the greatest relationship in our lives are with the eternal, with the sun,
Yes.
with the moon, with the sky, with the oceans. And when I look out to people who can do these things, like dump medical waste in the middle of the ocean, or be cruel to another, or just have an instant. I'll just give a quick story. This morning, we're walking our dog, and there was this older couple who were window shopping, and our dog's not very well trained. She's basically done what she wants because that's the way I raised her. Because I'm like, you're a freebie.
Yeah.
Do whatever the fuck you like.
Autonomy, autonomy.
Doesn't go down well with some other people. But she jumped for this woman's scone. This woman was carrying a scone, and she's like, food. And
Right, right.
this woman's like, and she didn't like whatever. Like we got her, and this woman's response was not, "Oh, that's cute" or "That's funny." She was really upset, like upset. And you're like, how? For me, it's just like how far from yourself, or how far from. I see it as one thing, like how far are you disconnected from these eternal and playfulness of a child and the beauty of the earth?
Right.
Do you have to
The
be to
play, right?
respond to play? Do you have to be to respond to the world in that way where you can dump rubbish or get annoyed because a dog jumped near you, or all these things? Like you're just so, but then I had actually, like, I was annoyed because like it was my child. I'm like, be rude to my
Well,
child.
that
But then
we
it's
were
like, how
talking about
sad are
that
you?
earlier, right? What is spiritualism?
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
What is it? Right? Is it the ability to let go of your pretense and to play? Right? To realize that there's another living being that's trying to interact with you, even if it's about a scone right in your
Yeah.
hand. The living
Give it a
being is
scone.
interacting. It's like,
She's hungry, man. Give it a scone.
right? Exactly, right?
She
It's
can't
like,
buy it. She doesn't have any money.
no. And even if she did, she couldn't say scone.
No, she couldn't.
So it's like, right, exactly. And the person behind the counter would, is that with cream or
Yeah, it's definitely with
no,
cream for her.
right? It's like, okay, yeah. So I mean, it's asinine that she would think otherwise. Of course, a dog is going to respond to food,
Hmm. It's what. Yeah.
right? It's right. It's what they do,
have
right?
you not
It's
observed a dog before?
right. Apparently, she has not. Apparently, in her world, dogs call for reservations, right? It's like be civil, right?
or,
I
the,
mean,
or or they're trained into submission where they have no personality left. They're
right,
so
right.
crushed into being, into being the little slave of the human being.
That's
Oh,
exactly it,
there's
right?
so
I
many
started
layers of fucked upness. But then I was gonna say, like, I feel sorry for those. I actually have I left feeling empathy because, like, that's a sadness that you're not. That's the way everything in your world then is these, and we all have it to a degree. But it's about like trying to remove them. Like everything is boxed. Everything is you're over
right.
there, I'm over here. Everything is othering of everything else. It's not
And
your
this
identity.
organization, right? This idea of organizing, of structuring and organizing,
Mm,
is that an innate human piece or is that something we're trained to? And
mm,
it's interesting because, my grandfather, when I was young and we were in the woods, I spent a lot of time in the forest, in nature, right? And we were tracking. And he told me an interesting thing once. He said, only when the humans are present will you see a straight line.
mm, mm.
Right? And at no other
There's nowhere
time
else.
in nature is there a straight line.
Mm,
Right? It's really interesting. I I'm even looking behind you now at the curtains, right? And the way they're hanging with the vertical lines going straight, right? And it's like something about humans. It's like we'll try
mm.
to find the straightest path, right? It's like, why? Nothing else in nature does that, right? It all meanders and curves and
What's the
you know
curve? What's Steiner
propagate.
school? Well, what's with Gerhard Steiner where all the rooms don't have the corners; they're rounded because we
Yeah,
naturally think more creatively in rounded environments because they're
in
not all
rounded
these like
spaces.
blocked
Yeah.
off right
Marilyn
angles.
Monroe, she had a house designed by Andrew Lloyd, and he designed it with no corners. Like the entire house is
Hmm.
made on a curve, inside and out. Everything
Wow,
is a
good look at
curved
that.
wall, right? And of course, she died prior to the house being built. So Lloyd built the house in Hawaii on Maui as a tribute to her, as a memory to her. And now it's the clubhouse of some golf course. Yeah, because that's the nature of right. So here's this fabulous home with this tribute to an incredible American architect who does this gift for a legend of the cinema who tragically, right, is
Yeah,
killed
was
by our own
used.
government,
Yeah,
right, abused and used, and they turn it into a golf club, right? It's so American, right? It's just so American. It's like, yeah,
capitalism wins in the end.
yeah. In the end, right? In the end, can we make money
Overall
off of
art.
that? Well, let's go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah.
Let's make some money
Not
off of
to
this.
Yeah. I guess it's the thing that is in that structure is like capitalism always like the pursuit of money sits above everything else, like above art, above all these other things.
Right,
Whereas as opposed to like there's nothing wrong with capitalism at its core of like how can it can use a process to create things through the generation of
right,
wealth, as opposed to like as it just sits there as its own entity, empty.
right,
Yeah.
right.
It's such a weird way of looking at the world. Like it's like,
No, absolutely. And when you think about, we have to have an instrument that accommodates for the wealth,
yeah, yeah,
right? So here's the dollar or the instrument or whatever that accommodates. Well, that means that you have a segment of the population that has all these instruments amassed,
mm,
but they don't actually have the wealth. They have the indicator of the wealth.
mm,
But the wealth really is the food you can eat in the morning and the
mm,
water you
mm,
drink, right? And the shelter you're sleeping in and the loved one next to you, you know what I mean? And the time spent under the moon, right? It's like the wealth really looks differently. But to these folks who are locked in this corporatocracy, I mean, I have visions of them sitting around in rooms counting their wealth. For what? You certainly can't eat, your instrument. Yeah, and I think the whole thing is interesting, right? The grocery store. You know, I got young students, you know, the university, and it's always like 20 somethings who look like they're anxious to save the world. Well, these young students, it's like they'll ask me, um, what kind of fish we used to eat when I was young. And my answer is always the one we caught, right?
mm,
Because now they walk up to a counter and there's 15 different kinds of fish, right? They get to pick the one they feel like eating tonight. Then the other 12 get to go into dog chow, right? Or into a compost pile. Meanwhile, the ocean is still being emptied of
mm,
fish
mm,
so that these people can have a perceived option,
mm,
right? When they buy or eat. When in fact, fishing used to be you ate the fish that bit the hook. You know what I mean? And you pulled in. You didn't go like, not this one, right? And go for the next fish, right? This whole idea of we're sport fishing. Why? That's like sport farming, right? Why would you, for recreation, go out and grow a carrot? Right, you wouldn't. So why are you over there fishing and tossing the fish back into the water? It's ludicrous when people are starving, right? And yet somehow, because we sell you more fishing gear, you've got 5 poles and 3
mm,
rods, right? And a bunch of hooks, and you're not even eating any of the fish. You're just catching them and throwing them back in the water.
mm,
Meanwhile, right there down in the corner on Second Street, the guy is standing on the corner begging for food to feed his 2-year-old, right? So you're right about the shadow is more distinct. And you're right about a great change is coming to the human experience. I hope we weather it well. You know what I mean? And I got this idea. We cannot do this as organizations or as institutions or even as governance or even as really rich, powerful humans, individuals. The only way this thing works is if we do it as family.
mm,
Like
mm,
we literally treat the whole planet as family,
mm,
right? All the resources, they're not resources, they're relatives. We're a family, right? It's like they're living beings within this globe moving forward. Now, I got to warn you, family always has that uncle you don't trust around the 13-year-old girls, right?
yeah,
Family always has that crazy aunt. She's not going to yell about that shit again, right? Somebody cut her wine off, and yet, come New Year's Eve, that uncle, that aunt, they're still at the table
mm,
because they're family, right? We accommodate. He never gets to be in the room alone with the 13-year-old girls. And somebody makes sure we cut her wine off at 2 o'clock. Okay. We don't want the screaming meanie at 7 in the evening. Right. So family accommodates for these failures.
Yeah.
Family understands that there's someone 180 degrees from you. You know what I mean? On the bowl. Family understands that we're not going to see things always the same, but we move together for the health of the family, not for the health of an individual. So it's sort of like I see this T-shirt. It says the power of we, lowercase we, over me, uppercase me, right? It's like at some point, when do we collectively outweigh the needs of the powerful individual? Right? It's sort of like we need to break down this idea that there's an Achilles or a Herculean figure, you know what I mean, standing on a pedestal in the middle of the town square. I always think leadership should come from the back of the room and it
Mm.
should come quietly, right? And it should reinforce the young people in the room who are going to become the perceived leaders of the future, not stand up there with your beard and pontificate, you know what I mean, about how things used to be, right? It's like, which we see in America right now, right? It's like, make it great. It was never great, right? Ozzy was an alcoholic, right? Harriet ended up leaving the TV show. Ricky died in a plane crash playing rock and roll, and Davy ran off and joined the circus, right? So, no. Father did not know best. Mayberry RFD is fiction. There was no moment where there was happy days in the Fonzie. Yet these Americans think that that's their actual history. It's it's insane, right? It's like, what? No, you can't watch television and pretend that that's your history.
It's,
But we do.
I think when you were saying before as well about treating everyone as family, when we look at, say, from I see it, the primary issue with capitalism is the people who don't win that game are treated like shit. The people who end up at the bottom of the pile in capitalism
Yeah.
are tossed aside like trash because in this story of
They're
capitalism,
considered no value.
they've got no value, and it's the greatest instrument for the individual to make it. If you look at the American story, you can make it whatever. And look, there's some obviously truth to that, otherwise it wouldn't exist. But equally, there's so many circumstancing, so many elements that need to happen for you to make it. You know,
Oh,
there's so
yes. I
and
mean,
so many things for you not
say,
to make it.
how many people did you step on to make it? Right?
To make
It's
it,
like
or
they
how many,
rarely cover that part of the story, right?
yeah,
How many betrayals?
or where did you, or like whatever, like where were you born, and all of these things that
Oh,
culminate
my
in all.
brother. I mean, look at this thing, right? Food is sacred, right?
Mm,
The food actually becomes you. We take the
yeah,
universe external, we put
yeah,
it in our
yeah,
mouth, we masticate,
and
and I've
it's
been masticating since I was about 11, right? So you masticate and you take what becomes you and you compost the rest, right? But it's a sacred act, literally. My grandfather used to say, only eat with people you love.
mm,
What does a business lunch mean? When
mm.
two guys are sitting down and they're both there to intentionally screw the other person over. They're both actually looking for the opening where their interests gains, right? And they're sitting down here and pretending to be friends and doing it over food, right? It's like, no, thank you. I don't do business lunches anymore. I don't do any of this hypocrisy, right? It's like, if you want to take advantage of me and profit through my stupidity, let's just sit down and have a conversation and see if I'm that stupid. Right. And when you're that honest with business people, they don't like it. They're like, can't I go out and ply you with drinks and get you to agree to something that really is not beneficial for you?
Because I don't. I was going to say, because of the shadow, they don't want to look at. We don't want to look. So we're othering, say, the uncle who the possibly pedophilic uncle, or the drunken
Right.
auntie, or the racist grandmother, and all these
Right.
things. You know, all these things that we will then demonize because then we can virtue ourselves. But equally, we contain a seed of all of the distasteful elements of humanity within us. And by so I was
Absolutely.
going to say, by embracing family is by embracing the shadow and actually looking at these things and going, I am not doing that, but I can see that I also can be
Have that
nasty,
potential.
cruel, all I have that potential. And that's a
Yes.
maturing, because an immature way is to be like, to other them and go, no, they're beyond the pale, they're beyond help, throw them in jail. We have to go to
Right,
war to
right.
these
Beyond the
people.
pale is an excellent way to state it.
Yeah.
You know,
And
and,
that's
and
and
that's
that's what's
that
coming
sort of
up
we
now.
give up.
We give
Right.
up
We
because we
give
just
up.
wanted we wanted, and then we feel all, oh, we're like, no, I would never do that. Me, never. What do you mean?
Yeah, right, right. We begin to become, sanctimonious about our particular position and where it is we are in this, right?
Yeah. It's
It's a
such
difficult thing.
But it's so beautiful. There was a great Buckmaster Fuller quote, which I don't want to go into full because I think I'll butcher it, but where he said, "The world will change only when we see our brothers and when we care for our brothers and sisters'
Yeah.
welfare as much as we care for our own."
I'm a real Bucky fan. You know what I mean? I just
Yeah, I heard you mentioned him earlier. I love
he
Bucky
was
too. Yeah.
an amazing individual. You know what I mean? When I was younger, I did some study there, and you know, um, good teachers are where you find them.
Mm,
You know what I mean? And it's interesting. It's like when you're ready to be that student, it seems like that's when you find them.
mm,
It's got this weird, interesting polarity that happens, right? It's like until you're ready, you don't actually find those great teachings, right? You meander around
yeah.
wondering, and then all of a sudden, it gets clear. I remember Baba Muktananda, Ganishipuru, right? It's like,
Mm,
wow. Uh, and only for a moment, but in that moment, he was so masterful, you know what I mean? So clear. But I'm not given to the guru culture, right? It's
mm,
like I always think each one of us is our own source, right?
mm.
We are our own gurus, right? It's like that's sort of like what you want to do with your enlightenment is get to this place where at least one human is listening to you, and that should be you. You know, it's like as opposed to trying to placate audiences, with this profundity that so many times for me feels pretentious,
Mm,
you know, and a bit pushed. It's like I I like it easy. I've always been around elders. I was raised by elders, and I've always been around them, and I've always respected the ones that were easy, right? They didn't set up a big doctrine around them, right? It was like having a cup of tea with a friend, right? It's like they would just like lay stuff on you that would poof, right? It's like, and here, poof, right? It's like open up these experiences between the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and then that other thing, right? That witness, that intangible fourth thing that isn't quite body, mind, and spirit, but somehow is there, right? It's like old Polynesians used to say that spirit of aloha that sits between the heart and the lungs, right? It's not quite the intestines, that first brain. It's certainly not the second brain, right? That's doing the good witch, bad witch thing, the binary,
mm,
right? And it's not the emotion of the heart, right? It's like it's interesting. The emotion is like the language of the understanding. I
mm,
remember when I was young, I really enjoyed mathematics. There was something about the numbers, right? And the clean way they balanced. And then it came to me like, no, that's not it. It's that they represent value, certain values. So then my attention shifted to music because it was those values, right, within those wave structures and those value sets that created these tones that balance. And I thought to myself, okay, math is not the language of the creator. Music is, right? It's like music is that same component with the numeric values.
Mm.
And then I got to this place where no, it's not the music. It's the emotion that the music makes you feel, right? It's the struggle. Dun dun dun, right? It's like that has a completely different feel from dun 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 dun, dun, right? It's like tone, music, duration create an emotional response within the being. All beings, plants, animals, right? And it's this emotion, the compassion, right? The ability to be empathetic and sense someone else's turmoil, right? Or joy, right? It's that that makes us great, right? That takes us beyond our transpersonal skins and our own desires and our own needs and greeds and makes us interface with the world. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Makes us reach out for relationship. So in each of us is a deep understanding. I worry and I wonder how we create those that have a penchant for the abnormal. And what I mean by that is, you know, to the rapist, that's
Mm.
like the perfect moment,
Mm.
right? To the murderer, it's like exactly what, right? How is it that they see glory and grace, right, in the serial killing? Whereas for us, we would see abhorrence and, you know what I mean? And yet somehow, so I was thinking about it and I don't like to think often, right? I'd rather just feel my way into something. But I was thinking about it and, you know, it comes to me that each one of us in the performance of these things is acquiescing to our personal sense of beauty, and that's the last prejudice that we will not be able to legislate out of, right, or philosophically see our way out of. How can you tell someone that who prefers sex with a 450-pound woman, right, who's an amputee, how do you tell them that that's not the norm? Because for them, that's like everything, right? And and why shouldn't it be, right? It's like, why shouldn't the world express itself in these ways? It's just some of it is so heinous and horrific from one perspective and totally acceptable from another, right? And then how do we deal with this? How do we control a personal perception of beauty, right? This is a, I sit around and I ponder on this thing because, you know, I can get us to the point where we can agree on governance, right? We can agree that this structure is more equitable to everybody, but getting inside the personal desires of someone, right? And trying to tell them, no, 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 chocolate is not better than strawberry. I mean, how do you do that, right? It's like you cannot do that. And so at some point, do we simply exist alongside the villainy? Is it our perceptions that need to change?
Yeah,
Right? I
well,
remember.
no, I was just going to say with it's also, is it meant to be like without the contrast, then where are we with understanding? Like,
How do we even understand
yeah,
ourselves if
how do
we
we
didn't see?
understand ourselves? And then what is this inclination we always have towards utopia, towards the perfect thing? It needs to be this way. Why can't we, as you said, why can't we exist? And it's not to say you then condone heinous acts.
Right,
You need
right,
structures to contain them, but you would hope that you create a society which leans more toward less heinous acts in its very structure. Whereas at this point in time, we have a society which sort of rewards, individual behaviour, which leads to oppression of others. in many ways.
Yes. Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
But
It's
I
a tough
don't.
thing.
It's impossible. Well, beauty. I mean, I actually think there is a standard of. I think there is. You could say a universal beauty. I think there's things which are like, why do people go to Europe, for example? They go to see these beautiful churches and things which took hundreds of years to make, and they're instantly moved by this greatness. I think there's a harmonic resonance to certain beauty, like you hear it with music. There's something in it that just resonates with the spirit. But then it doesn't mean the long tail of beauty stretches through all human beings, and we can all then.
Right.
It's
Right.
also
Right.
true. We also find anyone can find something beautiful that you may find something beautiful that I find disgusting. Like it doesn't
Right.
mean it's not beautiful.
I mean, simultaneously, all the European tourists are going to, Thailand so they can visit Champa or,
Yeah,
one of the other temples, right?
this
It's
is
interesting. We
it's just
admire
yeah.
the humanness of the effort, right? The fact that
Mm.
you can see thousands of people spend untold hours, to do this thing that,
Well,
and so is it that we celebrate our capacity as humans to come together to achieve something, anything,
hmm,
right? It's sort of like Notre Dame or the bridge to Paris, or, what I mean? It's like at some point, what do we think is, why do we still celebrate Thermopylae? I
mm,
mean, why is it 15, you know, roughly 15 to 1600 Greeks go to a pass and they die, and we
yeah.
celebrate 300 of them, and right, and the other guys are like chopped liver, right? It's like, wait a minute, there were Athenians who died there too, right? It wasn't all Spartans. It's like, so how do we, come up with these things, and why do we keep these stories alive?
Hmm. Well, but
Right?
we
It's
do.
like,
We that was such an impossible story. I mean, that's such a against. Don't
right.
what was the
It's
Spartan thing?
this
Don't
thing
tell me
against all odds, right?
against all
It's like,
odds. Like we love those stories. I guess that's the better. Whoever tells the best story wins, and those in power tell the best stories.
right, right. And they changed the story,
And
right?
they
They actually
change.
get rid of the other 1,100 soldiers just so
Yeah,
we can talk about the 300,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like the holding their own, right? It's like there's something about the ability of humans to overcome the moment, right? They may not win, you may not be victorious, but you overcome the moment,
Mm,
right? The moment of fear, the moment
mm.
of hesitation. It's like somehow we become greater, right, than the
I,
sum of our whole. It's
that's.
like,
I think that's exactly it though, because we live all of our lives terrified of death. Like that's the thing. And then when we hear stories about people who look that squarely in the face and proceed anyway, it doesn't matter if they live or die. But the fact that they've
right,
overcome the thing that the majority of human beings are definitely terrified of, which is
yeah,
inevitable. It's
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 inevitable. I mean, that's
it's the greatest
my
story.
grandfather told me, one day you're going to die, boy. Like I said, life is a mystery, and then you die, right? It's like he was really big on, if you know that, here's something. So Hawaiians are really big on this concept of aloha,
Mm.
right? Of it's they say it means hello, goodbye, and I love you, which is really ridiculous. So alo is the front porch of the house. The alo is the cover of the book. So in other words, an alo is the part of you that comes first. So this on a human is their alo. Ah is the breath of life. And we say that because after a couple of thousand years of watching, it turns out that everybody, doesn't matter if you're short or tall or fat or skinny or male or female or transgendered or rich or poor, it turns out at the end, we all say this, right? And so we said, oh, that must be what you call that, right? The ha, because everybody says the same word. It doesn't matter what culture or language, they all go. So we say, when you're born, you come in and say it backwards, right? You say, And so your whole life is lived between this aha moment, this,
Two births.
and, but aloha means to keep first, to remember what comes first. One day will be that last breath, right? That. So if you remember, always put first this idea that one day it will be your last, right? Between then and now, try to do something good for somebody, right? It's like between then and now. My grandfather used to say, all you got to do is help one other living being. Doesn't even have to be a human, right? It's like one other living being. Your life will have meaning, right? To have been there in that moment of need and to have provided that need without asking for repayment, right? This is aloha. This is, that's why they say it means love or compassion. But really, it's a remembrance that your life is finite. So is everyone else's, right? So there's no reason to be afraid of the authority. One day they will die too, right? There's really no reason to be afraid of those soldiers. They will clearly die one day also, right? It's like, so if we don't live our life in fear of death, we're able to achieve so much more. And he told me, don't worry about dying, boy. I guarantee you it's going to happen. Nobody gets out of here alive. Right. I'm like 9 years old, right? And he's like, nobody gets out of here alive. And I'm like, oh my God, could you wait till I'm 15 to tell me shit like that? Could I, like have a normal childhood? Right. It's like, he was like, no, the sooner you learn that, the better. And he was right. Right. I found myself at 13 and 14 looking at my classmates with a certain amount of empathy, right? And they were looking at me like I was weird, right? I was this weird little kid from the backwoods. And I remember thinking, gosh, they're so shallow in their thinking, right? It's like they're not reaching for what is deep here or what has meaning, right? And, then I reminded myself, two kinds of people in the world, and I'm both of them, right? So then I stopped judging, right? And just sit back, right? My grandfather used to say, judgment and judging is something that comes so natural. He says, please have your judgments, just don't believe them. Right? It's like he was like, yeah, have your little snap prejudice judgment and then throw it away because it's not true. It's just what you created in your little head, right? Your little fiction about something you've seen, right? And that was a really valuable lesson. Not to beat myself up for going like, oh, but also not to hold on to, oh, it's just me behaving badly, right? It's like I can see it for what it is, let it go, right? And instead walk up and go, hi, I'm Kalani and you are, right? It's like, and just be open to a miracle, right? Be open to something incredible happening. I've, even with the paralysis, even with 10 years in and out of the wheelchair, and the work, and I still haven't retired or stopped working or anything, not through the whole illness. And even through that, I thought, life is good. You know what I mean? Every day is really special. And every day I run into another human being that proves to me how fabulous this life experience is, right? I always say, this, boy, I'm so glad to be talking to you, Paul. I watched some of your earlier stuff, and I'm glad we did it like this, just having a conversation, just,
Yeah, I've loved it. I would
let's just talk about like what we see out there, man. It's a pleasure. I hope this is not the last time we're
no, I
talking.
definitely want to. I just want to. I'm also conscious of your time, but I want to finish on like what you're doing now. Do you have any final like things you want to leave the audience and
Yeah,
the work you're doing? For
we're doing a lot of work with Native people and young students into media. You know, the idea is being able to protect the intellectual property rights of indigenous knowledge. Now, what's interesting is I'm working with NSF and with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and we're digging into what is this fundamental overlap of indigenous knowledge and modern science.
mm,
I think
mm,
those are like misnomers, right? But as we look at it, I think that they're thinking somewhere there's a double axis where they line up all the data and line up all the indigenous knowledge, right? And somewhere there we see
there
this
it is.
correlation, right? Exactly, exactly. And I keep telling them, really, what's going on is these are separate systems of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
That come from different cultural lenses. The trick is teach all systems to all children and let the child be the innovation point, right? It's like stop looking for a graph, right? It's not on a graph, it's in a 6-year-old girl, right, who's living in Mumbai right now, who
Yeah.
probably has the answer to our energy problems, right? And we're going to end up sacrificing our future because we won't see her as having a right to an education or a right to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, how do we pull ourselves up by our human bootstraps and grow up, right? And grow up.
Mm,
It's like, there's only one world. We're all on it.
mm.
Like the Polynesians always say, there's only one canoe, pal. Where you going? Right? You think you're going to get off? And you know, here's the thing: the uber rich think they're going to Mars. Right? It's like
Oh,
if
good
they were
fucking
paying
luck.
attention, they'd realize we came from Mars. Right?
Well,
We came this way.
you're welcome to go to Mars if you want. That's fine. I mean, look,
Yeah,
it might be fun.
please go to
Please do.
Mars.
But you know,
You're gonna find that there's no water, there's no
yeah,
atmosphere. You know, the magnetic internal mechanism's not working. It's like,
or be
and here's the thing: scientists know. Right? We know. We've been looking at Mars. We know that no, you're not going to make it on Mars. So what's this giant commercial enterprise that they're spending money on, this dream of going to Mars?
Well, they keep worrying about the end of the planet here, and you're like, well, why don't you fucking look after it then and invest that money in re-education and helping save the planet we're on, as opposed to looking
As
at some
bad as
rock?
our planet is right now, it is still more hospitable to human life than any other place, right? It's like, what the fuck are they thinking about, right? It's like,
But
oh, you're going to
are
there?
you not looking at it? Like, how? Where is your consciousness? You're just not looking around. You're just like, nah,
Not at all. They're not
fuck
looking
this
around at all.
place. I want to go there. This place is boring. It's full of
Right.
dirty people.
There are too many minorities here. Right? It's like that's the thing that gets me.
So-
Who's the minorities?
yeah,
Right? It's
who
like,
is a
are they talking
minority?
about the poor people? The poor people outnumber them, right? It's like, what are you
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about? It's
Oh, those poor people are bloody annoying. You got to admit. I mean, they don't even, they don't eat the same food. They don't. They're
yeah,
not getting around
exactly.
in
Right?
supercars.
Exactly. It's like
It's
amazing
it's
how cavalier the rich are becoming.
it's just amazing how little time you're spending with anyone except your own elite group of people to think like that. Because it's like if you spend any time anywhere with people from any walk of life, the common thread is they're fucking people.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they eat and they sleep and they shit and they
They,
fuck and they have children and they,
yeah,
you know,
they
work.
got a sense of humor. They want to look after their family. They care probably
Right.
about 90% of the
Exactly.
same things as you. They got a few peculiarities which you find annoying. I find things about myself annoying. Like it's just
Right.
like,
Don't we all? Don't we
don't we
all?
all?
Right. It's just amazing to me.
It's
I mean, I hope I survive at least another 20 years, right? I mean, last look, the doctors gave me about 5 more months to live, but you know, they're always doing that, and I'm still alive, right? So here's the
don't.
thing: it's like
Uh,
I want to see the change.
hmm.
I want to see us grow up as humans, right? Really begin to value other life on the planet, begin to value. I mean, we have a long way to go. We don't even value the other humans,
Mm.
right? Let alone the trees or the insects or the mycelia or the, right? It's like, wow. And I'm always amazed by the amount of educated Western Americans who will literally lose their lives to save a dog, but will not feed a homeless child,
Mm.
right? It's like, what? It's like, you'll bend over backwards for PETA, but
Mm.
when it comes to feeding the kid down the street, nah, no go.
Mm.
To me, that's such an interesting thing. It's like we're driven by our own passions,
Mm.
what we find in personal beauty,
Mm.
right? It's like, so to them, the life of the dog in the kennel is more important than the starving 4-year-old girl.
Mm.
And who am I to say that they are wrong,
Mm.
right? It's their own personal perception.
But
And
it's very interesting. Yeah, it's very there's
right?
no answer for it because it's just,
No,
it's just
but
it's
from my
just
perspective, I think they're wrong as hell, right? And yet,
well,
and yet,
well
I
you
can't
can
say
do
that, right? I
you
can
can do
only sit
both.
here and
Well, no, but I mean, then you get stuck in what you're saying before about judgment. Like I find the more I get stuck in that,
exactly,
the more I'm just making my own life miserable, as opposed to just
exactly.
like
And
letting it go through.
so you see it, right? So you have to let it go. And so you live with
Yeah,
the injustice, right? And you let it go and you recognize it for what it is, but you don't build on the injustice by continuing to become prejudiced against, it's like,
yeah,
oh yeah, the secret to dealing with murderers is kill them all. Right? It's like, there's something wrong with that concept, right? It's like, right, great, we're all going to become murderers so we can solve the murdering problem. Right? It's just amazing, right? The way we use our convoluted logic,
mm,
right, to take us to these unmentionable places, really,
mm,
really. I mean, I wish with everything I have that the world was a much more loving place, right? But the fact is, the tiger has stripes for a reason,
mm,
right? The tarantula builds a trapdoor for a reason, right? The great white circles for a reason, right? It's like, so while part of me wants to be altruistic, the other part of me has to be realistic about the world we're experiencing, what we see. So I try to care for as many people as I can that are close around me. And I'll tell you something I will not tolerate. I don't tolerate injustice towards children. You know what I mean? Young children are victimized constantly in the world. You know what I mean? And
mm,
I just will
mm,
not tolerate that. I will not. I'm unreasonable when it comes to that. If I'm watching a child getting abused by someone,
mm,
I just can't walk away. You know what I mean? I just cannot turn the other way. Every child deserves to be loved, right? Every child deserves a chance, a chance at life, right? It's like, and when I see these pressures in urban situations that really sentence some of these young children to a dismal experience, right? My heart, it feels crushed, you know what I mean? And I think about what we could do, and these systems feel so large, right? That all you think you can do is on an individual basis, you know what I mean? Respond on an individual case by case basis. Because trying to take on the entire institution is daunting.
mm. But I
And
feel that's how you do change. That's I had recently experience with that just when we were in India, and look at the if you were to take that whole picture, it debilitates you to not actually do anything. But then you realize I could just I could help this one person. I could help this one person with a bit of money that could change their life,
their life.
and that's what you can do. So do it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, right? I mean,
Like,
you look around for what's possible. What can
yeah.
you do? And
Rather than
then
being like
do it.
it's all helpless. Otherwise, you're like, oh, it's all helpless. Someone else will do it, or
Let's go home. You're
we
right.
need to we need to
Let's have a
fix
Mai Tai on
everything.
the plane and go
Yeah,
home. You know what
yeah.
I
Let's
mean?
just go
It's
home.
like,
Either all the children are saved, or I'm not doing anything.
right,
That's crazy.
right. It's insane, right? And so it has to happen on one transpersonal
Yeah,
level,
yeah.
right? And really, isn't that how enlightenment
Works.
happens? Right. It's
Yeah,
transpersonal. It's happening on an individuated
yeah.
basis by experience and the moment for the
Mm.
individual.
Do you
Right.
think
You can't force someone to be
you can't force
wise.
any? But I was just going to say too, it applies to your life. If I think back to people who had impact on me, it was one comment by one person at one time,
Yes.
who made significant
Made that
change, who
change.
believed. Yeah, it's never some system or some philosophy. It was one person going, "I see this in you. You have potential for
Agree.
this," and you're like, "Wow,
Agree.
that's how we change things."
That's how we remember those great teachers, right? The
Mm.
teachers in our lives that we remember, the ones that weren't just part of the a
System.
cog in the wheel,
Yeah.
right? They were there for you. They made an impact, right? And literally brought you forward. I mean, I have an endless list of those individuals, you know what I mean, who made those critical choices with me along the way, you know, and
Mm.
I'm so grateful. I'm grateful to be alive, to just be here and having this experience and talking to you. I mean, it's just life is good. And then we die.
And then it may get, and then we come back.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, hey, just because you died, that don't mean it's over.
You could
Right.
come
I
back.
know because I've died a couple of times
Well,
and it
yeah,
wasn't over.
you could come
Right.
back as an orange billionaire. You never know. You might want that experience.
Yeah, no kidding, right? It's like if I did, I wouldn't move to Florida. There's
If you
better
do,
places in the world.
can you just shave your head instead of doing a comb over? Just do it for all of us, please. Get a wig.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? This is going to be an interesting a couple of years with
Yeah.
America and the Pacific Basin. And I'd like to invite you and me to stay in touch with each other over this aggression in the China Sea.
I would
Right?
love to. Yeah. No,
We
I mean,
should not let this thing develop without us commenting on it,
yeah.
without putting out into the world the unreasonableness of a third nuclear war.
Oh, it's not. The next 4 years or this next 12 months is going to be absolutely
I
crazy.
agree. I agree. Let's try to stay in touch over these next
Yeah.
12 months. They're going to be tricky.
It's going to be tricky, but I mean, I'm somewhat. Uh, my default was optimism. I, I just look at all the connected
Those
kids.
mine.
I mean, they say that before every war. They say it could never happen, and it does. But if I look at just the interconnectedness and the way in my job where I'm dealing with different people from all parts of the planet and how fluid that experience is, the idea that they're my enemy is just nuts. Like,
Yes, agreed.
like, what are you talking about? Like, and I just hope there's enough people who even, and we say, as you said, that we don't feel like we have the power. We do have the power. It's the fact that we give it to these people, or we think
Yes,
that we don't.
yes,
Just
yes.
stop
We need
buying
to
their shit.
educate each individual to know you have the power. You are your own guru. You are your own authority in the universe. It's like exercise that free will.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And move. And I think that's when we grow up as a human race. What gives me hope? And I'm like you, I'm a default optimist, right? What gives me hope is Star Trek and Star Wars. If we can tell ourselves a story for 40 years that says at some point the humans on the planet are all one government and work together, that's a story I want to reinforce, right? It's like, and right now, all over the planet,
Mm.
117 countries, everybody knows Star Trek,
Mm.
right? Every little 8-year-old kid understands, Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk and this. And the fact that that mythology exists gives us the potential to reach this global government state.
Mm.
I sometimes think the people who keep screaming about the evil of one world government are the uber rich because they don't actually want to share everything with everybody else. But let's face it, we could take the five richest people in the world right now, right? The Musk, the Bezoses, they all live in Hawaii, by the way. Ellison, right? It's like Zuckerberg, right?
Zuckerberg's building a house there, isn't he? I saw
Yeah.
and with some huge bunker.
Oh, he's got a whole huge compound, idiot.
Yeah,
He builds 100-yard underground,
yeah, yeah.
haven at sea level.
That's it.
Right. His compound is at sea level, and he builds an underground bunker at sea level. Right? Clearly, no one has taught him about tsunamis or the influx of water or what happens when you're underground with your venting machines and a whole bunch of ocean comes in. I know,
They,
just cracks me up. I mean, I worked for FEMA for like years, right? In emergency management, not where I would have put a bunker, right? But it's like, you know, they're
and
going to go extinct. That's okay with me.
and when you want to pop your head up after the end of the world and be like, "Oh, I'm glad I survived that." But I couldn't think of anything worse. Send me down in
Yeah,
the
you're not
first
going to do it at
first
sea
wave.
level.
Yo, he's not doing. He's putting his. He's going to be the first one to go. He'll be.
Exactly. The
He,
water's going to come right in, hit his filtration system, and
he,
he's going to be down there trapped, right? They're all going to be trapped. It's like, oh, who was the genius that sold him on this?
hopefully, you can post about it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is going to be so interesting. But if we took those five individuals and let's say we took 20% of each one of their incomes, right? And that's like $142 billion. Let's take 20% of that. We could literally feed, clothe, and probably make millionaires out of every human being on the planet. And they would still be the five richest people in the world.
Hmm.
Right? Those are the numbers. And yet they won't do it. Right? Jeff Bezos alone could change the trajectory of the human race right now, but he won't do it. Right? He's going to respond to his board of directors. He's going to sit around and go from 142 billion to 180 billion. What? It's like it doesn't make any sense at all, right? It's as if they don't see the need. The English at least had this, and the French, they had this thing of, the nobles, the oblige, right? The noblesse oblige, right? The nobles are obligated to pay for the
Hmm.
less fortunate in society. Man, they had that in the 17th, 18th century. How come in the 19th, 20th century, the rich suddenly are not responsible for everybody else?
Well, it's because these guys would claim they're self-made.
Yeah, they're
That's the problem.
self
That's the problem, and it's
self-made.
no there's no such thing yet. We're all using the railway roads of the people who we share this planet with.
Absolutely. None of them are
Yeah,
self-made, right? It's
yeah.
like,
Like you might have done. Like you certainly. I'm not to diminish like personal achievement, but it's insanity to think that that has been achieved by an individual and not a group. And I guess that the other way when nobles used to understand that they were nobility, so that was given to them, like there was some sort of god.
right,
So it's a different. Yeah, it's a
right.
very different. It's interesting to think that we've come from nobility, which you would have thought at the time was the worst circumstance for people, to a period of where anyone can supposedly make it, yet the similar
Right.
circumstances maintain. And then we say, well, these people are mobile, like even the poorest of them are mobile phones, and you're like, well, I don't know. They're pretty false equivalencies when you look at the situation of a lot of people in the world, how they're living. That could be solved, as you said,
Funny,
quite
even
simply.
even the poor have mobile phones.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
But that's the thing that's
without
thrown
a
out.
mobile phone, you can't even function anymore.
Yeah, well, that's yeah, yeah,
It's not like you have a choice. They
yeah.
literally have to go get a phone, whether it's
To do some kind of job, or they don't even. Yeah, it's
yeah. And the
yeah.
truth is, the really abject don't have any capacity,
No, I was
right?
going to
It's
say they
like,
don't even have the internet. Like all those really
right,
abject. They're
exactly,
so outside of this to have a chance to even get to a different point.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and that's the
Man,
thing.
well,
I've enjoyed. Thank you, Kalani. Thank you so much for your time.
oh man,
And
Paul, really, what a pleasure! What a pleasure to just be able to dive deep into some really interesting ideas and not feel restricted to a particular
oh, yeah, there's no.
itinerary.
Yeah, no, that's the way. Yeah, that's my mind doesn't get can't even focus. Just goes everywhere anyway.
No, a real pleasure, bro. I love to do this again.